They raised a glass to my disappearance, and I was visible enough to hear it. Laughter skimmed the ceiling. The band brightened like someone had turned up the wattage on Pride. At the head table, he tapped a spoon against crystal and smiled toward cameras that didn't need a reason. Beside his plate waited a sealed envelope, thick as a dare, the kind of prop men use when they want noise to look like truth. "To new beginnings," he said, eyes grazing every face and leaping over mine, as if I were a rumor that refused to die. "To finding what fits." The room obliged with elegant chuckles. I chose stillness. Humility is not surrender. It is remembering which battles are won by breath. He palmed the envelope and turned it for the audience, a magician showcasing an unbroken seal. "Since people like questions," he continued, "let's give them answers." The DJ laughed. A bridesmaid nudged another. A few heads swiveled toward me for sport. I rooted my hands in my lap. I let my spine do the talking. Paper tore. The quartet slipped on a note and fell quiet. He scanned the page, blinked, scanned again, as if repetition could rehabilitate letters that refused to serve him. The grin he wore for months loosened, then slid. Pride met gravity. No one asked what it said. Everyone felt it, like thunder arriving before rain. My breath stayed even. I did not rescue him with a reaction, did not rise to offer comfort, did not trade dignity for spectacle. Noise demanded a witness. Truth required none. He folded the page with the care of someone afraid of paper cuts and set it down like it might bite. A silence spread that wasn't awkward. It was honest. In that hush, I understood something simple. Character does not clap for humiliation, even when it is invited to. If you want to know how we arrived at a room primed for mockery ending, follow me backward, into the images we curated, the pressures we obeyed, and the cost of being edited out. Before that envelope cooled beneath his hand, there were years when image outran truth. He learned early that rooms reward shine, not substance, that a tailored suit and an easy laugh can make doubt look impolite. I learned to iron his shirts and his story, smoothing wrinkles no camera would forgive. Pride posed for photos. Humility stood off frame, holding pins in her mouth. He curated status like a feed, cropping out the hands that lifted the shot. Captions said, "We are building," while my account paid deposits and my evenings chased loose ends. He rented prestige by the hour and returned it without stains because I carried the spill. When congratulations arrived, he collected them like trophies and promised the next win would include my name. His mother coached the chorus. "A good wife," she said, "is gentle in voice and generous with silence. She measures love in how little space she takes." Aunties nodded, pastors smiled, and friends applauded the version of me that folded smaller each season. If I asked questions, I was ungrateful. If I set a boundary, I was cold. If I wanted credit, I was proud. Reputation became a weapon we carried to church and to dinner. He learned to aim it. He would tell a story of perseverance that skipped the part where my savings bridged his gap. He would praise partnership while my inbox held receipts. The more people clapped for his polish, the more I translated humiliation into holiness and called it patience. Image won the room. The guest list for his reception was not hospitality. It was a press release. Every invitation doubled as a headline. Partners, patrons, people whose opinions become furniture in certain houses. The venue was chosen because magazines loved its chandeliers. He wanted those lights to archive his narrative. If Marble could pronounce his name, he expected perfect diction. Behind those lights, I did work with no caption. I drafted budgets, negotiated deliveries, and soothed vendors he had flattered, then ignored. When a deadline slid, I slid with it and made quiet calls that saved public faces. My money did not wear logos, but it kept the stage from collapsing. Each transfer I labeled investment in us became a line item in his legend. He called it leadership. I called it rearranging credits. When I asked for my name on a proposal, he said later, "The optics are delicate. When I asked for repayment dates, he said, "Do you want to win or count pennies?" Pride wore a crown, humility carried the vault. The day I stopped apologizing for asking was the day Blame learned my name. His family emboldened the erasure. They praised his hustle and patted my shoulder like a faithful assistant. "A good man needs air," one aunt said, meaning space I should vacate. If I stayed home to balance books, I lacked vision. If I showed up to advocate, I chased clout. The rules kept moving, always away from me. Pride drew the map. Humility paid the tolls. I watched how reputation polices doors. Guest lists decide who counts. He learned to whisper to bouncers and call it logistics. He told me, "Let me handle the relationships." In rooms that mattered to him, I became furniture. Useful, quiet, moved when needed. Integrity started to feel like treason in a house of mirrors. Why does the venue matter? Because power loves archive. He chose a place where ceilings glitter and cameras return, where a night can be rewritten into legend by morning. He curated witnesses to repeat his version until it hardened. He expected my absence to finish the edit, but I had begun to separate image from integrity, and the room would have to learn the difference. The tension was simple, even if the living was not. His blame versus my pursuit of truth, his pride versus my humility that finally remembered its spine. I kept records, not resentments. I started naming my work, not hiding it. The more I honored what was real, the less his theater could instruct me. That is why I walked into the reception steady. And yet, the wound was not done widening. The closer we moved to the day he would archive his story under chandeliers, the more he practiced gatekeeping as love. Doors that I had paid to open began closing in my face, which is where the next chapter begins. Blame sharpening, truth hardening, and my voice learning to choose itself over silent. Abuse didn't march in wearing steel boots. It tiptoed in on compliments and strategy decks. When a plan failed, he called it market headwinds. When I asked where the money went, he called it reinvestment. My transfers were framed as belief in us. His withdrawals were framed as momentum. If I questioned the shape of that math, he lifted a brow and said, "You're thinking too small, light," and always found my pocket. He renamed taking as building. A bridge loan from my savings covered a photographer he needed for optics. A short-term float paid for a suit so a gatekeeper would take him seriously. When I asked for a timeline, he talked about narrative arcs and press cycles. I learned that a person can drown in buzzwords while standing on dry land. The humiliations were calibrated, rarely loud enough to earn witnesses. At dinner, he corrected my order, then told the table I had a delicate palate, as if preference were a flaw. At church, he squeezed my elbow when I spoke to a woman he wanted as a donor, murmuring, "Let me handle relationships." When a vendor praised my coordination, he stepped forward and recapped my sentences with different pronouns. We did, we decided, we led. Gatekeeping became romance dressed in logistics. At a rooftop launch, a velvet rope divided partners from support. My name, he said, had been left off by mistake, then slipped through alone to solve it from inside. I stood outside holding a box of swag I had packed and listened to bass lines celebrate decisions I had paid for. A staffer mistook me for crew and handed me a roll of tape. I tore off a strip and considered how labels stick. Another night, 2 floors beneath the ballroom he would later rent to crown his story. I worked registration for just an hour. That became the whole night. He waved from a chandeliered cluster where men traded cards. When I approached to deliver a message from catering, a guard lifted a palm. Guest list. I looked at my ex. He touched his tie and mouthed, "Later." Inclusion wore a wristband I wasn't given. The financial fog thickened. He converted my yeses into assets he treated as solo. When I asked for a receipt with both our names, he laughed softly as if I had told a charming joke. "Don't get petty," he said. "This is bigger than paper." Bigger than paper meant smaller than me. Gaslighting taught me to distrust my own pulse. He would frame my boundaries as mood, my clarity as conflict, my fatigue as sabotage. If a deal collapsed, he sighed and asked me to bring better energy. When I did research that contradicted his pitch, he accused me of speaking fear over our future. I started editing myself before I spoke, which is another way of losing diction. His mother's subtler chorus kept time. "A good wife doesn't count," she'd say, stirring tea. "She believes, she waits, she knows the spotlight burns men who must carry the name." In that theology, I was either a flashlight or a shadow. I became both, useful when he needed direction, invisible when he didn't. There were small rebellions that looked like accidents. I started archiving emails. I saved PDFs before they could be revised. I began signing my full name on vendor chats. It felt like placing pins on a map only I could see. He noticed. He kissed my temple and said, "I love how organized you are," then removed me from a thread to streamline. Organization without access is housekeeping. Foreshadowing gathered like weather. A planner who questioned his timeline found her binder relocated and her chair reassigned. He called it protecting the vibe. A junior associate who asked for credit on a deck was uninvited from the meeting. He called it keeping the table tight. When I asked why the table kept shrinking, he smiled, because not everyone belongs. I began to suspect that belonging was the currency he most enjoyed spending, and the cost was my voice. The night he announced his engagement without telling me beforehand, he texted a photo of rings and wrote, "Thought you'd be happy, I'm moving forward." The caption online said, "Finally, with a woman who understands my vision." Friends sent heart emojis. I sent myself to the mirror and practiced saying no out loud. The first time I used it, I simply declined to cover a rush fee for a vendor he had charmed, but not paid. He called me disloyal. I called it a boundary. We stared across a kitchen table we both had financed differently. Silence asked me to fold. Self-respect asked me to stand. I chose the latter, and the room changed temperature. The next chapter was inevitable. It wasn't the shouting that ended us. It was a sentence that finally told the truth. We were in the kitchen, under a tired bulb, bills fanned like warnings, my folder open to the page where numbers stopped lying. He didn't read it. He appraised me. "You're not built for big rooms," he said, tapping the counter as if it were a podium. "Stay in support. Let me carry the vision." I had practiced quiet for years. That night I practiced clarity. My money bridged your gaps. My work held your timeline. Put my name on what my hands built. Return what I loaned. Stop using optics to excuse harm. He tilted his head the way you do at a child who won't nap. "This," he said, lifting the folder, "is why you'll never understand strategy. You're small. Don't make noise." The folder hit the trash like a cue. Something older than fear stood up in me. "Respect isn't strategy," I said steady. "It's behavior. If my name is too heavy for your plans, then my presence is too." He laughed, a careful sound. "You'll be back. You can't do rooms without me." He returned to his phone, already performing for people who would never pay my rent. I did not argue with a mirror. I moved. I packed a single bag, ID, laptop, a hard drive, a toothbrush, the notebook where I had begun to list dates and amounts I wasn't supposed to remember. I emailed myself copies of statements and receipts, then placed my key on the counter like a period. He didn't look up. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "We're almost there." "Exactly," I answered. "I am." Outside, the night felt unscripted. Loneliness met me first. Honest, blunt, unperfumed. I walked to the bus stop because humility needed practice at public benches as much as pride had rehearsed private balconies. The air tasted like metal and mercy. A driver nodded without asking for my story. Streetlights stitched a path I hadn't dared draw. Despair sat beside me, familiar and persuasive. Resolve slid in on the other side and asked for the last word. I prayed the shortest prayer I know. God, meet me in the truth. The bus exhaled, doors opened, and I stepped into my own custody. No audience, no caption, just my name, my records, and a spine I hadn't loaned away. In a week-to-week room, I slept without his calendar in my veins. In the morning, I gathered papers the way some people gather flowers. I would language that keeps doors honest. I would stop mistaking erasure for peace. Tonight, I left the script. Tomorrow, I would read the fine print out loud. And when fear returned with its favorite question, "How will you survive?" I answered with a pen. I listed what was mine, my name, my records, my time, my peace. I circled each and wrote, "Protect." Paper, I learned, can be a kind of light. Tomorrow, I'd switch it on, for good. I started by turning shame into paperwork. At a community legal clinic, a woman with steady eyes showed me where my story lived on paper. Emails, invoices, bank statements, signatures. She drew 2 columns, gifts and investments, and put my transfers in the column that required evidence, not apologies. A ledger is not bitterness, she said. It is memory with a spine. I exhaled like I had been underwater. We talked about consent and contracts the way people talk about weather. Always present, often ignored. If your name creates value, your name belongs on the agreement. If your labor builds the thing, define the labor. If someone wants your signature fast, slow down. Naivete rushes, wisdom reads. I made folders with my name on them and stopped treating my work like a rumor. I learned that loyalty without boundaries is exploitation with perfume. I listed every contribution, dates, amounts, purpose, outcomes. I saved screenshots before edits and forwarded confirmations to an email only I controlled. I asked vendors to reissue invoices that included my role, not as a favor, but as a correction. When one replied, "You're so official now," I answered, "I'm finally accurate. Here's the PSA I wish someone had taped to my door. Document your contributions, read before you sign anything, keep your own records, protect your rights without apology." Ethics and paper trails are not enemies of love. They are guardians of it. If a partnership cannot survive clarity, it will not survive storm. If someone calls your receipts unspiritual, find a different sanctuary. We also discussed paternity chatter he had spread to polish his image. The attorney was clear. Children are not evidence, and private medical facts are not props. If paternity ever becomes a legal question, testing must be lawful and consent-based, and results belong to the parties authorized to receive them. No secret sampling, no public shaming. Should results appear in this story, they will come from his own disclosure or a court record, not from me. Faith did not shrink in this process. It matured. I stopped asking God to erase facts and started asking for courage to tell them kindly. I prayed shorter and wrote longer. I replaced dramatic speeches with good paperwork. I learned to say no to meetings without agendas and yes to contracts with deliverables. Boundaries became a door, not a wall, and my piece finally had an address. The first time I corrected a recap email that credited my work to the nearest suit, my hands trembled. The second time, they didn't. When a planner thanked my ex for a decision I had made, I replied, "Please update the note. I authored that change, and I'm available for follow-ups." She amended the thread and CC'd me on the next brief. Small corrections stacked into a posture. Paper turned the lights on. Courage kept them on. With the basics in order, I could build without bleeding. I wanted work that held and people who honored names, so I rebuilt my calendar from the ground up, reached for clients who valued clarity, and walked toward rooms where respect sounded like a native language. That is where the next ally found me, precisely when I stopped hiding my own signature. He noticed the work first, then the woman who wrote her name. He saw my checklists before he saw my face. At the community center's wellness fair, I arrived with a plastic bin of tape, pens, spare chargers, and a map I had sketched of where calm should live. The lights flickered, the coffee didn't, and 3 volunteers forgot their name tags. I labeled chords, reassigned tables, and turned apology into flow. When the doors opened, neighbors found order waiting where chaos had practiced. Afterward, I sent a recap. What worked, what didn't, what we'll fix by Friday. No drama, only decision. The next week, a librarian called, then a clinic director, then a small church that wanted their scholarship banquet to feel like honor instead of obligation. I priced my hours, put scopes in writing, and invoiced deposits before lifting a chair. Paper first, then effort. My name appeared on the agreements like a light switching on. I built templates like scaffolding, run a show, vendor grid, contact tree, rain plan, crisis script. I learned the language of sound checks and fire exits, the time it takes to seat a room without scolding, the kindness in a properly placed sign. I greeted custodians before guests and security before speakers, because respect travels faster when it starts at the edges. People began to send my number with a sentence. She makes rooms breathe. The foundation director noticed the breathing. He came early to a neighborhood fundraiser and asked 2 questions that told me who he was. What do you need to do your best work? And what won't you compromise to get it? I answered plainly. Clear agreements, timely decisions, fees paid when promised. I will not trade dignity for spectacle or community for clout. He nodded like a man who likes sentences that behave. He hired me for a modest series, 3 gatherings focused on food access and after-school programs. We signed a short contract with my name and the scope spelled out. The deposit landed without a reminder. When a sponsor tried to skip me and text him changes, he forwarded the message and replied, "Please coordinate with her. She leads." Transaction turned into respect in 1 sentence. Exploitation withered in daylight. Working under that canopy, I grew. I shadowed the audio tech to learn why microphones fail, watched chefs to learn how long a buffet can sit before it stops serving dignity, walked the loading dock to see how patience saves backs. I built a tiny team, 2 assistants who had been told to keep their competence quiet. I trained them to use lists like promises and to say their names at check-in without apologizing. I also learned to say no without an essay. No to quick favors that ate my weekend and erased my byline. No to exposure work that paid in pressure. No to calls after 9 unless a safety plan is breathing. My no became complete, not because I was cold, but because I was finally warm enough to protect my fire. The director modeled partnership rather than control. He asked for my perspective in front of people who could pretend not to care. He introduced me as the person who makes this possible and did not stand in front of me when problems arrived. When mistakes happened, and they always do, he looked for causes instead of culprits. He showed me wealth measured in steadiness, not chandeliers. Wins stack. A donor dinner ended with volunteers hugging the dishwasher first. A town hall resolved a conflict without anyone losing face because the seating plan honored every story. A food drive met its goal early because we mapped checkout like a blessing, not a cue. Each event tucked a new sentence into my spine. You are allowed to be visible in the good you do. I kept my promises to myself. My name sat on contracts, my work carried receipts, my team was paid before my wardrobe. I tithed to my peace by keeping Sabbath hours once a week. No email, no edits, only a long walk and a quiet prayer that said thank you for the days that hold. Faith didn't shout, it steadied. There were still tests. A glossy brand dangled a fat check if I could soften a youth panel until it photographed better. I declined kindly. The director texted a single line, proud of your no. 2 days later, a community hospital offered a project redesigning how they welcomed grieving families. We listened more than we talked, edited more than we announced, and left the building lighter than we found it. My phone filled with new names, not because I chased them, but because work traveled faster than rumor. I watched vendors relax when they saw my team's clipboards. I watched guards straighten when I learned their first names and used them. I watched my reflection become someone I believed. One afternoon, after a debrief that ended in laughter, the director slid a folder across the table. Inside was a capacity grant and an invitation. Hire your next coordinator, design a workshop on dignity for our partners, and come speak to our staff about boundaries that protect joy. There were no strings, only a clause I had requested. Credit will be shared publicly. Partnership multiplies. Control consumes. With respectful meetings, I felt the hunger for validation lose its urgency. I was building rooms that told the truth. I was building a life that didn't require me to disappear. I did not expect the past to knock again, but pride hates being ignored. A mutual acquaintance sent a message with glittering edges and a familiar undertone. Save the date, it read, for a reception under chandeliers that loved cameras. I recognized the venue. I recognized the handwriting inside the gloss. And I recognized the lesson I would carry with me when mockery tried to borrow a microphone again. The envelope did not invite me. It auditioned me. Heavy stock, gold foil, a caption from a mutual that read, "Come see what you lost," sugared to sound like well wishes. I held it to the light and saw what he wanted. A cameo from the woman he'd edited out, arranged to frame his new script. Provocation pressed its face to the glass. Poise unlocked the door, only from the inside. Fear asked for a costume change. Composure chose plain clothes. I decided to attend, briefly, quietly, on my terms. No entourage, no performance, a dress that honored the occasion without competing with the bride. Low heels that respected my spine. A small card with a blessing that cost me nothing but pride. I replied yes without commentary and saved the confirmation. Then I wrote 2 emails. To guest services, my name appears on the list. I plan a short, unobtrusive visit. If confusion arises, please call me aside rather than escalate on the floor. To the operations manager I knew, thank you for guarding dignity tonight. Here is my number if your team needs context. Poise prepares, it does not gamble. I planned the exits like a run of show. Arrive 10 minutes before the toast. Sit in the back. Leave at the first curl of disrespect. Rideshare ready. Phone on silent. Friend on text as a check-in, not a bodyguard. I packed nothing that needed rescuing. I prayed one sentence and meant it. God, keep me in the truth. Then I laid my outfit on a chair and slept like someone whose name had learned to hold itself. In the morning, I ate, worked, and breathed. By evening, the city glittered the way cities do when Image starts the music. I didn't bring arguments to the door. I brought boundaries. Let grace go before me, I told my fear, and let policy walk beside. When the room asked for spectacle, I would answer with presence, and let the next moment do what truth does. So I picked up my card, locked my door, and headed toward the chandeliers without looking back. I walked in carrying nothing heavier than my name. The chandeliers liked to pretend they were stars, and the room liked to pretend it was kind. I gave my card to the attendant, found my seat near the back, and let my breath keep time with the quartet. He saw me the way a mirror sees dust, something to wipe away before posing. His new wife leaned into the camera beside him, polished and pleased, the caption of a life he wanted archived. When the MC lifted a mic, the room folded its napkins and made space for performance. He was invited to speak first. He tapped his glass and smiled toward the lenses that loved him. To new chapters, he announced, and to partners who actually fit the vision. Laughter obeyed. Some people, he continued, were always more comfortable counting pennies than building legacies. His wife tilted her head with the grace of someone used to applause. Bless them, she said lightly. May they find a calculator that loves them back. A ripple ran the length of the hall. My hands stayed folded. My heart refused to audition. Humility is not a costume, it is a spine. On the head table lay an envelope with a formal seal, the same one he had been bragging about for weeks. He had commissioned a paternity report during a legal process, and in his words, wanted proof to silence gossip. He had waved that future paper like a flag long before it existed. Now it existed. The MC, who had been briefed on guest dignity, reminded the room of 2 rules: no derision and no private medical details from the microphone. If you choose to reference documents, she said, please keep disclosures to what the lawful parties have consented to share. He smiled, as if policies were applause lines. Since everyone loves receipts, he said, palming the envelope, let's make tonight educational. The room leaned forward. Truth waited where music usually lived. He broke the seal and unfolded the pages with a flourish meant for a different outcome. His eyes scanned, then snagged. Silence rose like a second ceiling. The band found its lapse and waited. He swallowed, pressed a thumb to the margin, and tried to keep his smile from falling off. As required, he began, voice thinner, I commissioned testing through the court, and the report is final. He did not read numbers or names. He read the line that belonged to him. The findings do not support my prior statements. He set the paper down as if it had teeth. No one clapped. No one booed. Truth doesn't need an ovation. It needs oxygen. The MC stepped in gently, a steward of air. Thank you for honoring consent and keeping details private, she said, and thank you for the correction. She pivoted without drama. As a reminder, our venue protects guest dignity and staff safety. We will continue with the program in that spirit. His wife set down her glass and stared at the linen as if it had betrayed her. She had come to star in a spectacle. Accountability had rewritten the script. A guest near the head table coughed into a napkin and suddenly remembered his water. Another adjusted a cufflink that didn't need adjusting. Humiliation looked around for allies and found none. I stayed seated. I did not lift my chin. I did not drop my eyes. I let the quiet do what I had come to do. Answer noise with truth. The MC invited a musical interlude to reframe the air and directed staff to refresh water, not rumors. Behind the scenes, I saw the operations manager I had emailed earlier lift a small pause card, a reminder to breathe before decisions. Security stayed at their posts with open hands. The band found a tender melody with no words to weaponize. After the song, the MC offered the mic to anyone prepared to bless the couple, not to litigate the past. No one volunteered. Sometimes the kindest thing pride can do is learn to sit down. He cleared his throat and tried for lightness. We all want what's best, he offered, a sentence that rang like cutlery in an empty sink. The MC nodded, thanked him, and transitioned to dinner with a professionalism that felt like mercy. Servers moved with first aid grace, setting plates and offering choices without judgment. At my table, a woman in blue whispered, "Are you all right?" And I told her the truth. I am. I tasted my food and found it unremarkable in the kindest way, like calm. When I stood to leave, I brought the small card to the gift table and set it among bows and glass. The operations manager approached, her voice low enough to protect the evening. "Thank you for your note earlier," she said, "and for your composure now." "Thank you for protecting the room," I replied, meaning the people more than the decor. She nodded toward the head table where the envelope lay folded like a lesson. "We'll document the incident and debrief with the host," she said, "so our policies keep their promise." I thanked her and gathered my shawl. He intercepted me near the foyer, not with swagger, but with the stunned politeness that follows impact. "I shouldn't have framed things the way I did," he said, looking at a point somewhere safer than my eyes. "Thank you for hearing the report and keeping the details private." "Thank you for correcting the record," I answered, because mercy without boundaries is just permission. He waited for a different line and didn't get one. "Have a peaceful evening," I said, and meant it in the most adult way possible. On my way out, a bridesmaid touched my arm and whispered, "I'm sorry." I told her to take care of her dress and her heart and stepped into the hall. The lobby felt like a different city, lighter by a few lies. Outside, the night made room for me without questions. I texted my check-in friend a single word, Then I requested the ride I had scheduled as a backup. Stood under a column that didn't need me to be. Through the glass, I saw staff resetting center and guests relearning. The operator was updated, but the part that mattered wasn't. It was the policy. Noise had tried to. Truth had reminded it. I didn't need triumph. I needed still protect the quiet person at the next event who couldn't That thought steadied me ever. When the car arrived, the driver greeted me by name and opened the door. A sentence. I slid inside, let the city blur into lights, and allowed my heartbeat fall back. Tomorrow would bring an apology. Tonight, I watched the venue and felt the seat tilt. Morning came without confetti. It arrived with documents. The operations lead eat first, attaching incident and a call. Who said what? When the pause card was lifted, how the program. She thanked me for the heads-up note staff. It wasn't a spectacle. Stewardship rooms improved. By noon, he followed the private apology with a public correction. In 2 paragraphs, he acknowledged his earlier statements about me, that the report did not and that mocking an invited guest. He kept details private required and thanked the venue center. He did not ask for absolute. He set the record where he had raised quietly through the network that had clapped. A sponsor pressed pause, citing value. A photo house declined to release images, explaining that they do not distribute before you. None of it. Integrity. The venue policy. Contract removal. Only hosts designate authorized people. Staff. Yeah. Back of house. The MC a template redirecting derision. Small system. That afternoon, the foundation. He had watched worker and wanted to come build something. The offer. A partnership to design by design for venue planners. A modest grant to a platform to publish practical standards. Vendors. The terms honored boundaries. No storytelling for sport. No harvesting my past as content. Credit share. Invoices paid. I said yes to the work, not the spotlight. We hired a coordinator, printed a slim guide with checklists and language for hard mode to help us pilot. We taught security to read a room without reading it. We taught planners scripts for blessing without body. We taught hosts how to apologize and correct the record. What we built did not make it made even. He wrote once a short note acknowledging the workshop. I think up the boundary. It is a state so no one else has to be lessened. What didn't happen matters too. I didn't post thread or circulate report or turns didn't need. Closure arrived as a calendar filled with knew their name. The room that tried to archive my now houses training protects other. Image had demanded a victory. Integrity wrote a policy and went back to. That's the justice. Want the moral that holds this simpler. Character is the currency the bill stops. Character is the only currency that doesn't crash. Status can be rented. Integrity. When pride chased applause, truth waited without a room learned. If you remember one thing, remember this. Don't weaponize status and don't surrender your name. Keep someone else. Protect your rights without apology. Put your name on the work you're document, contribute, read before you sign, and keep your own ethics and paper trails aren't enemies, they are guardian. When noise demands a spectacle, answer with truth. When pride performs, let humility stand quietly and hold the line. My faith note is providence isn't a shortcut, steady path. I believe God meets us where courage and not where pretense, and prayer steadies the hand that signs. Peace doesn't ask you, it invites you. Present. If you're rebuilding, choose partners, respect, not just say no without an effort. Say yes where value and best protect you when the lights are bright in the crowd. Restoration beats revenge because restoration is working the clapping. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching? What would you have done in that? Walk away. Tell me if someone else one sentence you're younger. If this story strengthened, tap like and subscribe for more quiet grace and smart stories where dignity wins and lessons travel. Save it. Share it with someone who voice and ring the bell so you never miss a We're building a that chooses hope over cynicism. Truth. Thank you for staying to the end. Your presence matters. Your paperwork, your boundary, and your heartbreak. I'll meet you in the next. Until then, stand your voice below. Your dignity goes everywhere.